Stevens is Director of Justice Care Solutions. He's an independent advisor and consultant to providers of healthcare, youth justice and children's services. He was the government's professional advisor, I think, responsible for youth justice policy, children in custody and children who are detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, and has been Director and Chief Executive of various services for children and in youth justice. So welcome, and perhaps you'd like to give us some introductory remarks, and then I shall try and provoke you with some questions.
Thank you, Lord Carlile. Thank you very much for inviting me, and also thank you to Carlile for reconvening your inquiry. What I want to do is to confine my remarks, if I may, to the actual restraint methods. I think there's broad agreement, certainly this evening, that the emphasis should be upon positive relationships between staff and young people. We're agreed on de-escalation, and we're agreed broadly that physical restraint should be a last resort. So far as I'm concerned, I remain convinced by the conclusions and principles of the original Home Secretary's Restraint Advisory Group in 1997, which are firstly non-pain compliant methods of physical control, secondly annual review of those methods, thirdly single source restraint training and accreditation, in other words not cascade training, pain compliant distraction techniques not permitted, use of handcuffs not permitted. The latter two were fundamentally debated by medical advisors between 95 and 97, and their advice was crystal clear that children, especially children who have been abused and suffered violent family backgrounds, do not respond to pain as adults do, and secondly, that the bone structures of children and young people are not sufficiently well developed that they may result in injuries being caused to them inadvertently by default during the use of force. To that I would now add that physical restraint of children training should be registered, provided, accredited, monitored and inspected by a dedicated service for children, in other words, not the prison service, for example, by the Department of Health, the Department for Education, or a leading children's charity, such as MCB, or the British Institute of Learning Difficulties, BILD, which already does that sort of thing for children elsewhere. My second set of comments are in regard to the use of restraint, the reasons and frequency. There's no doubt in my view that the levels of physical restraint are high, too high, in the UK's secure juvenile estate, whether that's secure children's homes, STCs or YOIs, and they're far higher than elsewhere in Europe. So far as STCs are concerned, they are mostly related to the STC's detailed contractual requirements and the penalties. Now that's not necessarily the fault of the STCs, and it's debatable whether that's right or wrong. I have two recommendations to make in respect of that. Firstly, that the Home Office research paper of 1991, number 66, is repeated. That compared regimes and outcomes of secure children's homes and YOIs. It should now be repeated to include STCs and establishments elsewhere in Northern Ireland and Scotland, which have similar problems, and elsewhere in Europe. That should also, in my view, review whether or not the levels of restraint are related to the different regime characteristics. The second recommendation is into independent research into incident management and the use of restraint to provide more accurate information than is currently available about the reasons for restraint and the use of force, the characteristics of staff involved, i.e. by age, gender, ethnicity, physique, parental status, previous use of restraint, their qualifications and previous experience with children, and the characteristics of the children being restrained, i.e. similarly by age, gender, ethnicity, legal status, and their physique and their care histories. I'm sure there are other characteristics about mental health, capacity, and so on and so forth, if you get the flavour. And the third area that I wanted to comment upon this evening is the need for pain-compliant restraint methods, because I profoundly disagree with the findings of the government's independent review of restraint by Smallridge and Williamson in their report published in March of this year, and I have yet to find anyone with a professional children's services background or from within the government's inspectorates of services for children or any of the other government departments which have responsibilities for children who concur with their recommendations in favour of using pain-compliant techniques and handcuffs to restrain children. Frankly, I find their conclusions surprising from two former directors of children's services, and if they are implemented, that would be a seriously retrograde step in the history of childcare standards in England and Wales. I do not share the view that pain-compliant techniques and the use of handcuffs will lead to shorter restraints, time-wise that is, and thereby less injuries being caused to staff and children. My view is that this will inevitably lead to frequent application of pain, more injuries to children, not less, and regimes which become more authoritarian, less effective, more prone to institutional bullying, and less dependent upon the high standards of good staff relationships and mentoring, which are currently and rightly emphasised in the statements of purpose of secure children's homes and STCs, and to which they are inspected. I do not believe that hybrid training, i.e. pain-compliant and non-pain-compliant training together, is feasible. Staff who have been trained in CNR, for instance, have reported that during the intensity of physical restraint, they were more likely to resort to their original pain-compliant training than non-pain-compliant holds. And this was clear following the secondment of prison custody officer teams to Medway STC in 1998-1999 to supplement its STC staff. And more than anything else, it will fundamentally alter and irrevocably the shape of the Secretary of State's original commitment to Parliament given by Kenneth Clarke on the 2nd of March 1993, which was not to provide prisons for children, but to provide high standards of childcare and education and health, and to ensure all three that STCs would be inspected by the government's Children's Services Inspectorate. If pain compliance is indeed being seriously proposed, I think this will cause great difficulty for local safeguarding children boards, LSCBs. They have statutory responsibilities for safeguarding children in their area, including those children whose liberty is restricted in YOIs, STCs and SCHs. I note with some dismay that Smallridge and Williamson consulted widely with and within the Ministry of Justice, but curiously